Government, being an art, although many laborers may cooperate in carrying it on, only one will and one intelligence can plan and conduct it, so that, in dialectical sense, all government is essentially monarchical. When several architects work at once or successively in building the same monument, either they all follow the designs of their first chief, or the finished work is one only physically, because its parts are contiguous, but artistically, like St. Peter's and almost all cathedrals, is a compound of various designs and of labors differently inspired. I do not mean to disparage this growth of human works by accretion, or of historical buildings in mixed styles, when each part is genuinely inspired by the taste of its date and author, and all the parts conspire in expressing a common passion for beauty and fitness. No single design can look towards all kinds of excellence, and often compound works and eclectic civilizations are richer and more justly human than any pure embodiment of any single idea. But this happens, I suspect, because our single ideas or unchallenged passions are always unjust to our total nature and express a domination in the soul of one faculty over others that are no less truly rooted there. It is the glory and the torment of human nature to have more budding, half-conscious capacities than it can bring to expression together. For that reason, the new seems exciting out of proportion to its real merits, and the old dull and irksome in spite of its relative propriety. Were it possible, however, for a single language to utter all that the soul at any stage of development is ready to say, utterance in that single language would alone be legitimate where it was native, and any foreign word but disloyalty and a waste. So if the mind and heart of a monarch could share all the demands of his people, reason and goodness in him would automatically dispose all things for the best. His sense of justice in each case would be better than any law, which is never more than an abstract rough rule not representing exact equity in any single instance, and his policy would be wiser than that of any possible party or assembly, because he would appreciate equally all other men's aims and possibilities, and would see clearly and follow faithfully the best possible path in the given labyrinth. Such universal sympathy and impartiality is of course an ideal not realized in any mortal, yet relatively to a special function it may be approached. As a father who may be without passions and crotchets of his own, may be perfectly disinterested, yet sympathetic in guiding and judging his children's interests, much better than they can guide or judge them. For this very pride and lordliness as master of his household will quicken his sense of whatever is for its common advantage. He will, in his own ideal interest, restrain one member of his family and encourage another for the peace and prosperity of his house. It is this natural gift in the Father. It is this natural gift in the Father that has made patriarchal government possible and lasting among pastoral tribes, where war and politics were not too complicated or on too vast a scale for one man to direct everything with sufficient knowledge, and the tradition of such patriarchal government, with its domestic roots, and its semi-sacred authority was often preserved and forfeited as much as possible in great hereditary monarchies, both in ancient and in modern times. The monarchs, to be sure, were seldom models of wisdom or virtue, yet everything in their breeding and their position was calculated to support artificially that identity of interest between the ruler and the ruled, which existed naturally in the patriarchal household. The wealth and glory of the monarch were inseparable from that of his country. Yet two great obstacles to good government subsisted in spite of this identity of true interest. The king might be so frivolous that his own true interest and glory as a monarch might not count with him in comparison with private intrigues and amusements, or his pride and stubbornness in his sovereignty might render him militant in governing his people according to some fanatical notion of his own, instead of in sympathy with their natural and genuine interests. Unfortunately, it is not hereditary or absolute monarchs only that are subject to these vices. Popular leaders and popular sects are also subject to them, and we must patiently study the history of each people to understand why they have been fortunate for such brief periods and have strayed into so many blind alleys. The almost universal sense of the badness of the contemporary government has, however, a deeper cause than the vices of the governing person or party. Discontent with any government is inevitable, because any real government that does not let things merely drift must impose sacrifices, some severe and some universal. The virtue of the ideal monarch would be to feel all these sacrifices keenly and impartially, and to distribute them in the way that would make them most tolerable all around. The sacrifices that are most felt are those that are obvious, like taxes and conscription. It is therefore good politics, though not necessarily good government, that taxes should be indirect and military service voluntary and professional. Obvious sacrifices are least resented when they are habitual, not excessive, and equally distributed. People will still grumble at them as at bad weather, but will put them down to the nature of things, or the will of God. Yet it is normally these natural scourges, poverty, ill health, ill fortune, and dreary labor, that make the wide unhappiness of man. And it is these, beneath the inexcusable scourge of ignorant and wicked governments, that an ideal monarchy, like a wise parent, would seek to prevent or to mitigate. It is here that ideal monarchy, falling back on its natural model, the patriarchal family, paints for us the picture of a society opening the door to all the potentialities of human genius, natural, stable, and decent, and insofar as it was decent, contented. Monarchy is government by a single psyche, by the organizing principle of a living soul. Organization signifies the cooperative regimen of a great variety of functions, senses, and instruments. It makes possible, by properly timing and spacing those different activities, to make room, without disorder or conflict, for the most various types of life. Society, in an ideal monarchy, is a many-colored society. There is vital freedom for the individual, since a wise monarch recognizes the inwardness, originality, and secrecy of each actual life, and there is vital liberty for spontaneous association when persons find themselves cultivating the same arts and developing congruous thoughts. there must be distinct classes with corresponding privileges and duties, for it is impossible to carry on different trades without acquiring different habits and a different range of ideas, and to live and act together when people have like minds is a means of stimulating and deepening the originality of each and the range of their common intelligence. Classes may sometimes become castes, and it is natural and pleasant that sons should adopt their father's profession, but each individual arises by a fresh fusion of generative elements in new circumstances, and his disposition must be respected and nourished generously under any morally representative government. The dice box must be fairly shaken before each throw. Careers may be open to talent without destroying the home in which children are brought up according to the means and station of their parents. An ideal monarchy, I am thinking of the East rather than Europe, would maintain a hierarchy of offices and emoluments as the Catholic Church does, but it would not allow hereditary nobility, even if it had naturally arisen, to monopolize the higher posts. These would be given with an eye to the good of the whole people and of the special service concerned. They would therefore never be given by popular election or party influence. That monarchy, if good, is the ideal of good government, follows from the nature of government, which must be an exercise of intellectual and moral synthesis in the living mind. This can exist only in one person, and it follows also from the possibility of instinctive representation of many children's interests in one disinterested paternal mind, and its impossibility in a collection of many children's minds, each bent on its special interests. In a primitive society of hunters and pioneers, where all have similar preoccupations and there is room for all, so that emulations can exist without hostility and cooperation without interdependence. The mind of each comrade may be a good mirror of the common good, and action may proceed by acclamation without breeding resentful minorities or desolate pariahs. But where civilization is articulated, places limited, and aspirations diverse, there is only one way of establishing a relative justice and contentment. This is to compose by political art a moral organization of society such as nature generates spontaneously in the family and in the patriarchal tribe. Variety and subordination of arts and functions must be established, and the powerful influence of custom and of pride in special forms of skill, sentiment, amusements, and even dress may be trusted to render necessary diversity of classes, manners, languages, and perhaps religions, a peaceful and contented enrichment of human life. It is not in the militant will of any of these classes or opinions that the generative order of society, which produces endless variety, can be reconciled with the peace and order that each type of life or art requires for its perfecting. A superior, comprehensive organ must prudently plant and foster such growths as the circumferences favor at each point in each season, while maintaining the fundamental industries and morals on which all liberal arts depend for their liberty. This superior organ can be only a human mind, not incompatible in its official elevation with the inevitable imperfection of human beings, but a proper education, a wise selection, not hereditary right, made by the predecessor, or by some council rich in experience, besides the traditions of his great office, with his established organs and advisors, might be expected to keep his elective monarch tolerably free from scandal and caprice. Can such an ideal monarchy ever arise? Alexander the Great caught a glimpse of what it should be. So did Augustus Caesar and perhaps Napoleon, but these were chiefs of militant adventures, as the popes are too, and not fruits of innocent growth. Their partisan heritage was a fatal handicap for justice and universal sympathy with nature. Life must inspire the control of life. Chapter 7. Moral Vicissitudes of Monarchy. A mother with her brood is a natural form of society. Domination by the father seems in comparison accidental. It will arise nevertheless if the father is vigilant over his mate, claims her continued loyalty, and is capable of providing for her and for her young, or at least of defending them. It is ominous to be defended. We shall soon be possessed. There are males indifferent in these matters. They may be ignorant of their fatherhood. They may regard little ones as a troublesome accident to which females are subject for unknown reasons, and they may contemptuously leave their mates and offspring to their own devices or to the jurisdiction of the tribe. Socialism, in this respect, is very ancient and most convenient for the cock of the walk. It is also very conservative, like all anonymous powers. And inexorably cruel education and cruel neglect sift each generation, killing off the weaklings and imposing the tribal virtues. Patriarchy shows more initiative, a personal mind being keener to perceive special possibilities, and matriarchy is more tender, being quick to protect the weak and to note the ways of individuals. A sort of matriarchy often survives within the patriarchal order. We find it still in the kitchen, in the drawing room, and in the nursery. There is also, here and there, under peculiar laws of inheritance, a civilized queenly matriarchy, like that of Penelope. It marks the dominance of the homestead, in which the mother or the grandmother may embody and impose tradition with a greater authority than, in ordinary times, can belong to sons or to husbands. The men are constantly abroad, hunting or fighting, perhaps on distant expeditions, and probably dying young. They came to seem only emissaries, serving from afar the sacred hearth, where the mother keeps religion and wise industry alive from generation to generation. Nevertheless, this quasi-religious matriarchy exists only on sufferance. We must expect that any exceptionally vigorous or long-lived husband or son choosing to stay at home will at any moment resume or usurp the government. There can be no real domination by the weak unless through the imagination, as in theocracies, and the imagination is inconstant. The family, if it is to exist at all as a form of moral government, must be controlled by the father. To give the mother and the children an equal voice, or an actual supremacy, is to surrender the unity of the family, substituting control by society at large, or leaving each individual to take its own course, like a roving animal. Matriarchy would therefore appear to be a convenient and habitual regency for the benefit of absentee monarchs, rather than a genuine sovereignty of its own account. In a well-governed Roman or Christian family, this regency has always belonged to the mother within the household. The husband is supposed to be preoccupied with public affairs and with making a living. He does well to leave the care of young children, servants, food, clothing, and even religion to the wisdom of his wife. Sometimes, however, when he is a busybody by temperament, or does his work from home, or has grown old and lazy and cantankerous, he becomes a petty domestic tyrant, always fault-finding and meddlesome. Better if he has to stay all day at home, that he should play the grandfather in slippers at the chimney corner, or sun himself in the garden, frankly letting his wife have her own way and do his thinking for him. Matriarchy makes for peace. A certain appearance of good order and happiness in some families is due to this cause, but the appearance is treacherous because, according to the irresistible order of nature, the nest exists for the sake of the flying birds, not the flying birds for the sake of the nest. Hovering round it and sitting in it may be an occasional duty, but flying from it is the joy of life. Yet when the father leaves all authority in the mother's hands, or in the family as an institution, his own function seems to have become merely instrumental. He is the servant of his wife and children, existing only that they may exist, and working only that they may carry on forever the routine of domestic life. If he fights, he must justify the war in their eyes. If he goes to the chase, it must be only that they may have game for their table. If he studies or theorizes, it must be to defend their possessions and their prepossessions. He, whom nature endowed with the energy and intelligence of a master, has become a mere agent or attorney to watch over their interests. The vigor of a true autocrat depends on a nice balance between the man's personal authority, which protects him from criticism and rebellion, and his competence, which enables him to supervise the detail of government. The ideal dictator should be old but vigorous. He should have done all the things that he commands others to do. He should know his people familiarly, and the names and characters of his servants. Yet he should have no favorites, and his own wives and sons should tremble before him. He should be always able to revoke and exercise personally the powers which, on occasion, he may delegate to others. For this reason, it is important that his dominions should not be too extensive, or his government too complex. The secret of his power is that everybody's interest should lie rather in obeying and supporting than in setting up any opposition, secret or open. If he must have satraps and advisors, he is likely to be their victim, or at least their dupe. His palace should still be a tent or a farmhouse, where messages may reach him daily from his furthest possessions, and where he may sit in perpetual judgment, distributing orders concerning war and the chase, relations with his neighbors, migrations, bargains, and the care of animals, lands, and crops. He should also, if he is not to be thwarted by superstition and visionaries, be a high priest in his own house. A mark of a truly patriarchal government is polygamy. Polygamy, I mean, for the patriarch's benefit, because the people at large can seldom be polygamous. They may be promiscuous and but loosely tied to any permanent mate, but poverty, with a number of males equal or little inferior to that of females, makes it impossible for every man to monopolize many women. Yet this is the dream, conscious or unconscious, of every truly masculine bosom. Erotic impulse is always young, always dazzled afresh by beauty and excited by opportunity. Yet, when spontaneous and not grown weary or vicious, it is terribly jealous. The natural, masterful male, therefore, insists on preserving his conquests and demands fidelity in his wives without admitting an obligation on his own part to be constant to any one of them. So thinks the Oriental monarch, feeling himself absolute. So Muhammad, knowing the heart, encourages himself to feel. So Henry VIII and Louis XIII ventured to act, if not to legislate, and so modern emancipated persons of all classes would like to do if the modern world left any room at all for genuine freedom of action. But you can't play the whale in a box of sardines. Polygamy not only gives satisfaction to sexual pride, it protects kingly pride also. It is the ruin of matriarchy. The influence of a favorite sultana may be decisive at a given moment, but it is not likely to be permanent. And even when a single queenly wife or mother presides over the harem, the polarity of concubines, their seclusion, and their quarrels leave the master wonderfully free to think and act like a man in the world of men. He is doubly lordly, lord in his own house, and out of his house, lord of himself. By weakening each mother's authority in comparison with that of the common father, this system strengthens the clan. It multiplies the troop of sons and sons-in-law and grandsons. The family becomes an army, the home a castle, and almost a city, and the patriarch, if not an absolute lord and prophet in the desert, is at least a great patrician in the state. Paternal authority is often galling. The child rebels against his elders, screaming and kicking with the most absolute intensity of hatred long before he can speak. Yet paternal authority generally wins in the end. It secures the sanction of custom, conscience, and affection. How does this happen? Is it because the child soon finds himself happy and is launched, well instructed, into a free life in the world? Far otherwise, the child soon forgets or seems to forget his impotent rage, because he soon forgets or seems to forget everything. But if he does not retain, deep in his heart, the sense that his parents are his natural enemies, it is probably because he has no depth of heart to retain anything in. They are his natural enemies, just as the winds and the sea and wild animals are. They are necessary and useful to him in the same sense. They have instincts of their own, paternal instincts, which he profits by, and without which he could not live. Their affection, their precepts, their possessions are his hunting ground. There he lays his little traps, picks up his worldly experience, and finds stimulus for his dreams. But they are not his friends. They do not understand him, nor he them. They do not will anything as he wills it. If occasionally, perhaps in the mother, one ray of real sympathy breaks through the everlasting cloud of anxious fondness and admonishing supervision, it seems a momentary miracle, something as wonderful, as incredible, as dreamlike, as if the winds, or the sea, or the wild animals had spoken and answered him intelligibly. The older he grows, the more he grows apart. His friendships, his love affairs, his musings, his vices, his hopes, are all things to be screened from the domestic eye, to be nursed away from home in secret. But home remains home for all that, and parents remain parents. The prodigal, in his extremity, will return to them repentantly, his private will apparently broken. But his more prudent brother had essentially, in a latent way, the very same history. Only he has tried the length of his tether more cautiously, and from the beginning has discovered in domestic authority a force to be exploited, a resource worth all the excitements and hardships of freedom. What then gives to the patriarch his enduring, unshakable strength? What enables him, even in his dotage, to keep in hand his tribe of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, his host of servants, slaves, and clients, his great possessions, and his absolute personal government? The cause is that every member of this vast family, from the mother down, is daily and hourly in the same situation as the prodigal and his prudent brother, driven to obedience and conformity by the inclemency of the alternative, and terrified at the abyss of a bleak, solitary, disastrous rebellion. The patriarch is probably neither better nor wiser than his children. He has no right to his dominion. He is merely a center of crystallization, around which custom and petty vested interests of every sort have gathered. No one is satisfied, but everyone nevertheless, is attached to what crumbs fall to him from the patriarchal table, and most jealous of all domestic puppies or alien curs that scramble for more than their customary share. Everyone will conspire to fortify the chieftain's authority in order to bolster up his own. The wives will appeal to him against each other, the daughters against their mothers, the mothers against their daughters, the sons against their servants, the slaves against the slave drivers, and everybody against the slaves. A distant, intolerably impartial despotism will seem to each of them a guarantee against neighborly outrages. In any close society, it is more urgent to restrain others than to be free oneself. Hence, the tendency for the central authority to absorb and supersede such as are local or delegated. Partial autonomy, if accepted, is only a political compromise, not a spontaneous ideal. That a constant centralization still goes on is shown by intolerance of great nations to smaller nationalities within their borders. There is no mercilessness like that of nationalist movements. The people are always for some sweeping plan. It is more remote, more steady, more impersonal, easier to attribute justice to and to idealize. A judge, even if arbitrary, is good to threaten your rivals with, and bad law is better than none. At least it enables you to forecast the risks and issues of your affairs. It offers you guarantees. A judge has a discoverable generic character and ruling motives. His past decisions, by force of personal vanity and inertia, will suggest his decisions in the future. And when the public too has come to take his habits of judgment for granted, common law has been born. The energy of a concentrated autocracy is sometimes enormous. Everyone at home resists the thought of insubordination, while their absorbing patriotism has turned everything abroad into a moral blank. In warlike or raiding enterprises, the ties that bind the militant nation to its chief are tightened, and since the vengeance of the enemy will fall indiscriminately on the whole predatory people, they must all hold the more desperately together. At the same time, in case of success, the spoils of war, in the form of office and advancement by the leader's favor, will raise his followers to a relative sense of importance, if not of eminence. If territories are conquered and the natives made serfs, the conquering race will become an aristocracy. Every member of it will occupy a privileged position in virtue of his blood and of his allegiance to his tribal lord or his tribal laws. This was the basis of feudal monarchies in Europe. The rulers were first kings of the Franks, or Goths, or Huns, etc. They became kings of France and the rest simply by extending their possessions through conquest or marriage until they came upon a brother king strong enough to resist them. Fortunately, the feudal system allowed an elaborate hierarchy of landlords, from the tenant farmer to the supreme and usually theoretical suzerain, with the most picturesque variety of customs, rights, and privileges, so that the monarch with the widest nominal dominion might well be the most gracious and chivalrous and the least oppressed with business. The relations of all these monarchs to one another and to their nobles were survivals of tribal relations and duties. The relations to the conquered natives and to the resident aliens, like the Jews, rested on different forms and degrees of territorial dominion. When, however, through fusion of the languages and legislation of the two superposed races, and the partial fusion of their blood, the original contrast between them tended to disappear, the ground for feudal monarchy was undermined. The kings were no longer the patriarchs of their aristocracy, nor were the landowners of another nationality from their tenants. How then did the monarchs have hereditary rights to allegiance, or the landlords hereditary rights to the whole revenue of their land? Evidently, when some external power did not suddenly destroy the system, gradual mutations must cause the land to pass to the cultivators of it or to the state, and the monarch, if retained, must fade into a decorative first magistrate of the republic. So at least an innocent philosopher, expecting people to be rational, might have imagined. But in fact, the function of a real monarch has never yet graced the president of a republic, unless Cromwell can be said to have graced it. Yet the exercise of autocratic power is too spontaneous a fiction in some phases of society for someone not to exercise it unbidden, as if by magic. It fell to Napoleon and to minor dictators for short and troubled periods, but it has become almost normal, at least as an ideal, for party leaders. They may be mediocre and shady persons, but so were many hereditary monarchs. And it is not in themselves or for what they do that they triumph. They triumph as demagogues. A demagogue leading a popular party and farsighted enough to keep himself in power when once he has seized it, becomes a perpetual dictator. Almost all the real tensions that give strength to a monarchy are repeated in such a drama by an untrained actor in a meaner setting, but the audience remembers nothing better and can be made to applaud. Chapter 8: Independence and Fusion among the Arts. There are two chief offices, long performed by parents and elders, that grow into distinct departments of government: to administer justice and to wage war. Ideally, an appeal to justice takes the place of somewhat imminent appeal to force, as if the sense of equity in the judges, who may be the crowd present at the quarrel, would bring the virtual force of the community to the rescue on the side that had been wronged. In practice, however, especially when precedents or laws can be invoked to influence the judgment, the sense of justice itself expresses a vested economic or ambitious interest, an established domination not founded on fairness but on force, so that the force of law appears to be the free mind as itself a brutal force. And there is another element of judiciary justice, when long established, that, without being economic, seems to the free mind an imposition, and this is the element of mere custom or superstition that enters in to the traditional law. It may require military force to eradicate this legal tradition, since economic domination, if firmly established, can remake legality, if not equity, in its own interest. Often, too, the growth of legal justice is cut short and rendered unnecessary by foreign invasion and conquest, which at the same time impose a distinct government, sharply contrasting with the native customs on which a native government would have rested almost unawares. That all government is an imposition and an evil, and that freedom, empty freedom, is the first and fundamental political good, may then easily become the secret conviction of the natives, even if their foreign rulers have rescued them from many evils incident to life in the jungle. It would require an almost hopeless inquiry into which I cannot enter to trace the ins and outs of arrested evolution and impose progress in the history of various nations. I must be satisfied with merely pointing out that these mingled currents exist and render unjustified and superficial many local grievances and many rash dogmas that figure in political controversy. The natural growth of society is not rational. It is subject to every evil without attempting to counteract these evils scientifically. Government, however irrational, may be the will that animates it, and however regardless of the will of its subjects, at least is an art and method and in the use of means to its ends. It may be odious, but it affords an object lesson in the control of events. That the lessons so offered are seldom or never learned by the government that supplies them through its blunders and vices does not deprive those lessons of their force for the philosopher. But the philosopher has no greater power than the statesman to trace the causes of public events and less opportunity. Plato, no doubt, the greatest philosopher who has carefully studied politics, while he has painted admirably the vices of society and of politicians, has proposed only arbitrary ideals and given futile advice, like any other moralist who disregards the vital liberty of nature and the consequent diversity of attainable goods. With this premise, the reader will not expect me to follow Aristotle in declaring that there are three good forms of government: monarchy, aristocracy, and constitutional democracy, in this order of excellence, when they are good, but that when corrupted into absolute or direct democracy, oligarchy, and tyranny, tyranny is the worst, and absolute or direct democracy the least pernicious. These would be judicious judgments if at the same time and in the place of Aristotle a man were called upon to express a practical preference. The passions of the people are spasmodic and soon divergent, while human nature and tradition survive in them and restore a tolerable balance, as the sea does after the worst storm. The reign of a tyrant is also short-lived, but his vices are professional, and both the occasion and the practice of them become chronic. Yet these types of government, as seen in classic antiquity, change with epochs and races, and ancient judgments become inapplicable. Preferences are themselves expressions of aims bred in particular persons in particular circumstances. A philosopher is a man and has his tastes, but it is not his business to insist on them, rather to abstract from them as far as possible, and to exhibit the character and connections of institutions of various kinds, so as to enlighten the will of whoever may chance to hear him. To summon others to will what they do not will is as impertinent as it is useless. But an enlightened primal will sees in the first instance how to attain its purpose without making or inflicting unnecessary sacrifices. And later, having drunk the cup of success to the dregs, the will may even revise or rescind itself, in so far as its blind demands contradict one another. The contradictions are temporal and local, in that incompatible forms are, in this world, rivals for the same matter. But among the forms themselves, there is variety without rivalry. The circle neither envies the square nor wishes to devour it. The growth of society and the shifts of dominations and powers that underlie it are not to be traced to politics, that is, to the question who governs and by what superficial play of intrigues and conspiracies of private opinions and public opinions. All this forms the gossip of history and may be important by accident, because trifling accidents sometimes divert the course or cause the wreck of the ship of state. But the economic and liberal arts raise civilization above barbarism, no matter into whose hands and by what methods. Official power may pass from one man or party to another. The weight of such men or parties itself depends on the economic or military forces that they seem to lead, but that sometimes support and sometimes betray them. To the foreign militant order that often traverses and deflects a people's heritage, I will turn later. Now it is the economic and the liberal arts that I would consider in their special functions. The spontaneous economy of the human race discovers and improves the means of defense and attack, insofar as these seem to contribute to preserve its existence. There is no essential change in the direction of intelligence and art, from the rudest contrivances to all mechanical wonders that now surround us, complicate our lives, and absorb our attention. The so-called domination of mind over matter, which is really the domination of one animal species over its habitat, might become a moral domination of means over ends in that species. And it would become such a domination if the liberal arts do not flourish as they do at the same time and profit by the wider field that economic labor opens to spiritual dominion. Not only do manual and ideal arts profit by being practiced together, but even two purely industrial arts render one another sounder and clearer in their principles and theory. As arts, they cannot conflict. It is only the persons that practice them that may be rivals for place or reputation in society, and the more so when the art they practice is the same and in the same country, for duplicates can oust one another. But a poet and a sea captain interfere so little with each other's success that they might even, with advantage, be the same person. Chapter 9. Intrinsic Values of Government. The moral pros and cons of government are not confined to utility or oppression, for besides affecting prior and independent interests, government initiates something new. At the very least, it institutes itself, and the mere fact that this new vortex has arisen in the habits of a group of men introduces among them a new art, a new type of desires and satisfactions. This new art, called government, is not without specific emotions, which never could have figured in human life if no governments had existed. Politics are a sport like hunting, fighting, and play acting. They are also a lottery with big and little prizes. What is called ambition is largely, in the ambitious soul, a tendency to play a part as in a dream, proudly placing oneself in the center of thrilling scenes and impressive ceremonies, full of sound and large gestures, but perhaps signifying nothing. Megalomania inebriates with a sense of greatness, without knowledge of what is great. The pose, the art, the orderly procedure of government are a human good. They not only flatter the vanity of men at the top, probably tormented all the time with secret worries and fears, the same pageant fills the underlings far more innocently with satisfaction and vicarious pride. They feel they are not altogether ignorant of great affairs, not only what reaches them through the keyhole or in the antechamber, but the mere sense which reading the newspaper may occasion, that momentous matters are afoot, that clever men are quarreling about them, and that these clever men are perhaps as little masters of events as is the man in the street. Criticism, satire, and wise shaking of empty heads are certainly privileges that the existence of government propagates generously among the governed, no matter what other benefits it may fail to confer. And here, too, all is not mere malevolence or complaint. In criticizing the government, the visitor feels himself in the government's boots. He imagines how much better he would have managed, and the honest glow of doing so much good, unfortunately prevented, and of transforming things according to his ideas, gives him the emotion of ruling without its commitments. No wonder that conversation in circles where government is familiar turns continually upon politics. A rather monotonous trickle of actual authority also flows down to petty officials. These have, no doubt, satisfactions of their own, but rather acrid. They are too conscious of the rather objectionable official immediately above them, and the petty tyrannies they may be able to exercise over the public are no compensation for the narrowness of the sphere to which they must be confined. And often a ministry or office under the government is not a participation in government at all. It is only a place to fill, a routine to follow, and there is more obeying than commanding in the poor clerk's life. Military men, especially when retired and no longer subordinate, police, and attendants, feel themselves more directly channels and representatives of authority. They button up the official uniform with complacency and bubble over with righteous indignation at the laxity of the times. They whisper the news with trepidation, and they prophesy how things are sure to turn out. You would think they were talking of a race or a prize fight, but no, they have not bet on the result, and the issue is only which party shall be next in office, and what words shall be in vogue for a while, without anything else being changed in their personal destiny. Political enthusiasm is a disinterested thing. It is a free gift which the existence of governments makes to the imagination. In self-governed nations, as the phrase goes, this popular participation in the life of government is more serious. Indeed, the theory of free government is that the people themselves govern, the constitution adopted, and the officers elected being supposed to be passive vehicles for the popular will. And in some ancient republics, and in modern states where the referendum is adopted, a majority of the people, or of such part of them as vote, actually do decide particular points of policy. To that extent, in fact, the voters are at the moment a part of the government. Whatever breadth of vision or sense of initiative and responsibility they may acquire is simply their share in the directive imagination proper to governments. While it is not impossible that even the official and bureaucratic passions of a governing body may take root in public assemblies, the Greeks, it has been said, spent their lives governing themselves for the love of listening, speaking, and shouting at the public assembly. They would neglect their trades and their families, and in their zeal for a party, a reform, or a war, they would gladly sacrifice the most solid interests of themselves and their country. Thus, the corporate governmental egotism, which in autocratic and in party governments is so marked and so scandalous, may extend also to democracies, proud of being governments too, just as the people of Pharisees who feel that they are champions of a divine law may carry on a theocracy no less blighting and more reckless than would a few conservative priests. The meanderings of a bad popular government hardly ever stray so long from the direction of tolerable policy as do those of an oligarchy, where everybody's part of the government, the aims of the government are more plebeian, and the radiation of political life does not exist, partly because there is no outlying nation to be irradiated, and partly because there is no focus intense enough to spread a dominant magnetic field. This, of course, is not true of great constitutional democratic races like those of England, France, or the United States, because in these countries the popular mind is hardly cognizant of the private bodies, foundations, and vested interests that actually carry on 9/10 of the national business. What the people decide is at best which of two traditional parties shall govern, but the whole machinery of the government, most of the points of policy, and the whole body of law, privilege, and custom is guarded and known only by the official classes. In such democracies, there are great centers of charity, learning, influence, and fashion. There are professional armies and navies and a caste of politicians, and there are established or incorporated religions. Hence, the life of the people is actually governed and inspired by custom, from occult, unsuspected, uncritical sources of benefit or injury, and the radiation of current governmental life takes place as in an autocracy. One faculty, among others, which is stimulated by office, is directive imagination. Directive imagination is very lively in children. Their daydreams are full of the times when they shall be princes, and make great gifts, and forgive great offenses, and win a great love, and thwart the vast insidious machinations of some baffled fiend. Real life somehow smothers these youthful impulses, and the directive imagination is suspended until the little obsessions of daily business can be laid aside, if they ever can, and then, for want of the old childish faith, nothing ensues but moonshine and mere sentimentality. To become actually master, however, reawakens the old impulse. The new-fledged minister is again a child. Again, the dazzling scene appears of the feats and triumphs to come. He dreams of speeches applauded, measures passed, elections won, finances restored, fleets and armies equipped and victorious, miles of wasteland covered rectilinearly with model cottages, and statues of himself in a morning coat and a crown of laurel rising in public squares. All this is not wild imagination. It may be realized, and yet soon something is apt to go wrong. Directive imagination is not power, it is only that Nietzschean egotistical folly. The will to rule. This will requires the cooperation of circumstances to become effective. Even an Oriental despot, untroubled by colleagues, constituents, or the stubborn routine of departments, finds that all is obstacles on the throne. Great things are about to begin, and the Grand Vizier, with a lengthened nose, announces that the treasury is empty, or the provincial governors in revolt, and when that wicked Vizier is sent to prison, his virtuous successor regrets to discover that a royal brother, supposed to be safely accounted for, has turned up alive, or that the whole harem is pecking at the new sultana. Then The directive imagination has to furl its sails a little and take a new tack, and it may not be long before it comes permanently to anchor. Nevertheless, directive imagination must be taken seriously. It is a dangerous thing. The illusion of creation is one of the greatest of pleasures and is most passionately defended by human conceit. To see things take shape before your eyes according to your idea, as may actually happen when the idea is opportune, is an intoxicating spectacle. In that case, the idea, being bred in an organ, trained and ready to act, can more or less accurately prefigure the coming action. Just as you can think what you're about to say and almost hear the words when what you're about to say is already being rehearsed in your brain. One of the suspicions hardest to entertain is that what you create or wish to create might, after all, not be beautiful. Therefore, all the forces of passion, egotism, vanity, habit, and conscience unite to attach a public man to the line of policy which first attracted him, and to those persons who obey him in it. This prepossession he calls loyalty to his party. Whatever concessions his directive imagination may have to make, whatever feathers his ideal may mold, he will continue in his partisan course as swiftly and irrecoverably as a launched torpedo. A party in power is a blind engine, incapable of redirecting itself, and carried forward by the pledged and mortgaged imagination of all its members. It is not only the public that is in danger of ruin, but the members of the government themselves, whose private interests subsist, of course, beneath their political intoxication. And the more honest and self-forgetful they are, the more apt they will be to defeat their own residuary interest, as well as that of others, in their visionary zeal for their political nostrums.